Hi. This is Tara with Crafting for a Cause. We are at the Community Center for our workday and class. Today our class is going to be quilting, and Megan will teach that class, but our organization this month is Savannah Legacy Gowns, and I have Marissa Peterson here to tell us a little bit about that.
Hi
Hey!
everyone! So Savannah Legacy Gowns, we take donated bridal gowns and turn them into infant burial gowns for those who have suffered pregnancy and infant loss. So today we're making the mini quilts to go along with those because we want the families to have a keepsake after they have spent time with their little one. So I'm really excited to be a part of this. I'm excited to share more with you guys.
All right. So what do we have here?
So we have some of our models here. This one is a 22-week model. It's weighted and sized appropriately because a lot of our volunteers have never worked in bereavement like I have, so I found these are really helpful for them to understand what we're working with. So that is a match set that goes with this quilt. So this is what one of our quilts looks like. We also, for the babies who are too small and fragile to fit in a gown, we make these little wraps. So they make a pocket that the baby's feet slide down into, and then we wrap it around. This is our 11-week model. And this is what those look like laid flat. It's 3 squares. One is folded in half to make the pocket. And this is what a full set. So we have diapers and hats that are donated in pairs of 2. So one can stay with baby and one can stay with the parents. So that's what we do.
Okay.
And here's one of our gown sets. One thing I love is because we have so many different volunteers, we get different styles and sizes and tastes of gowns. So it makes it where the families can have a choice of what's best for their family.
Awesome. And this is all just donation and volunteers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We will have the link to the Legacy Gowns on our page too. You guys aren't doing work days right now because of COVID.
Yes.
But typically you were doing work days.
Yes, we were doing work days once a month, either a weekend or weekday. We were alternating so different volunteers could come. And we are hoping to start those again in the spring, pending COVID numbers and a location that will have us.
Okay, and then if you can't sew, there's plenty of other things you can do to help.
Yeah,
you can.
The wedding dresses, when we get them donated, they have to be taken apart is one of the simplest things. So a lot of people already know how to use a seam ripper, or we can teach you. There's things like ironing or cutting pattern pieces for the gowns. That makes it where our seamstresses can do more sewing while other people can do things that are less of a skill.
Or cutting out.
Yeah.
We have some good
squares.
We have some good ninjas.
Pieces. Yes, we have cutting ninjas.
Yes. So we definitely can do that. Anything else that you can think of to add?
What if someone wants to donate fabric or maybe their own wedding gown? What do they do? How do they contact?
So they get in touch with us either through our Facebook page, Savannah Legacy Gowns, or they can email or call me. I can put that information in the comments. I'm Marissa, I'm the director, so I handle all the donations. We do have an Amazon list for some of our supplies, and we can always use wedding gowns as well as flannel fabrics is what we use for the backing of the blankets. So those are a huge help.
Okay, so the blankets we're making today, one side is going to be quilted, and that doesn't really matter what type of fabric, right?
No, there's all sorts of tastes and styles.
Okay, and then the other side needs to be a
very soft
flannel
cotton or a flannel.
Cotton, okay.
Because it's going to go against the baby's skin and it's pretty delicate.
Okay, and then size-wise, we said...
Size-wise for the quilts, I mean, anywhere from 12 by 12 to 16 to 20 it should fit within the little bags. And like Marissa said, it doesn't matter what pattern you want to put on the top or what cotton you want to put for your top layer, as long as the bottom is some sort of flannel or a softer fabric. And there's no batting needed, so it's only the top and the bottom layer, so you don't have to worry about any extra cotton on the inside.
All right, awesome. So you're going to teach us how to do this?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
All right.
So it's going to take a little bit to go through all the steps, but yeah, if you'll bear with me. So we're gonna do that same rectangle block pattern that you saw Marissa had over there. Here, I'll show you what it's gonna look like. So this one has the top quilt already finished. I just need to connect it to the bottom backing. This is like a soft flannel. As you can see, there's no batting. So this is what the pattern is going to look like once we're finished. The rectangles are cut.
Yeah, sorry.
They kind of are. They're multiple triangles, right? They're cut 3 inches by 8 or 8.5 inches. I have mine cut at 8.5 inches just because I like a little bit of wiggle room when I want to go and square my blocks. So I've got 3 inches by 8.5. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use just a regular stitching foot, which whatever machine you have. We're going to use a straight stitch, and then we're going to sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So everybody's machine is different, but however you want to set it so that you're working at a 1/4 inch. For me, I like to use the edge of my foot, and I just shift my needle all the way over. Then I don't have to think about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of 2 of these here. We put right sides together. So the right side of a fabric is whichever side of the fabric has the print on it. So you can see that this one's much more bright than that side, right? So this is the wrong side, and this is the right side. This blue doesn't have a right side or a wrong side, so you can't go wrong. So right sides together, I'm going to line them up. And you can use pins if you'd like. You can pin the side. For me, since these are so small, I just hold them together and they kind of just static to each other, if you will.
And you're a professional.
Yeah, that too.
She does this all day, every day, and so she's a little bit better at it than the normal person. So feel free to tack it down.
Yeah, I'll pin it this time. So I'll pin it at the top, making sure it's on a nice flat surface while I'm pinning. I'll pin it maybe in the middle. And then at the end, and you see I'm trying to make these edges as flush with each other as possible. Okay. So for me, like I said, I use the edge of my foot as my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just gonna set my foot down. You can see that my needle is not at the complete edge. I don't know. It's fine. My needle's not at the. She's pressing buttons on my machine. My needle's not at the complete edge of the fabric here. I give it like a little bit of wiggle room so that it doesn't suck the edge right here down into my bobbin. So, and with these pieces, we're going to just chain stitch them. We're actually not going to knot them at the beginning, at the end, because we're going to do that later with them all connected.
So you don't need to backstitch?
Nope, no need to backstitch.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to sew all the way down. Yes. Stopping before my pin, removing my pin.
What? You don't sew over?
I do not sew over. I do sometimes when I'm really lazy and I want to break my needle, but otherwise I try not to sew over my pins. So we're just going to sew all the way down. Okay, and then when we get close to the edge, I'm just going to grab my next set. Same colors. Matching up the edges. I'm not going to pin this one, so I'm going to get through this video as quickly as possible. So you can see I didn't like go all the way to the edge here. I kind of just snuck this guy under the presser foot. The feed dogs will actually pull it through. So this is called chain stitching. All the way down. The table is shaking so much. Okay. For this quilt, we're gonna make 4 different. We're gonna make 4 blocks. So I only need 4 of each color here. So we're on number 3. I apologize, my machine is shaking so much. Yes. And they go pretty quick. Okay, last one. They're pretty boring.
It's hard to say because a lot of times they don't know where I'm at, and they don't know these things. I usually work with a big company. We know Savannah upstairs that way.
Okay, so I finished my little chain. You can see they're all connected together. And now we go to the ironing board. My ironing board today is a wool mat, just because I wasn't wanting to lug my entire ironing board here.
And apparently ironing is very important when quilting.
Yes. If you want straight lines, ironing is very important. So I've got all of them cut apart now. I'm not even going to worry about the little tails right now. You can trim them off if you want to, but I'm not too worried about it. So we're going to open it up and turn it so the right side is down. And then we're going to take this seam and press it open. So I'm going to take my iron, press it open.
And that's just to help with the bulk, right?
So that when I go over it later, if I go over this seam, when I put them all together, it's not like a giant bulky mess there. So that's one. I'll iron all of them.
What is that girl I was telling you about with the bobbin?
Alright. Two. Try not to burn your fingers.
Let me get back to sewing, so here for someone.
Alright. So I've got all four of them. So now that they're nice and pressed, you can see that the lines are nice and clean. Now we're gonna go back over here. So now we gotta attach our yellow. So like I said, you can do the top of your quilts however you want. I can put the yellow on this side, or I can put it on this side. Doesn't matter. Today I like having the pattern in the middle, so personal preference, I guess. I'm just gonna put the yellow on this side of my quilting block. So in order to do that, remember we're gonna do right sides together. So this doesn't have a right or wrong side, but pretend. Right side together with this one, and then we're gonna stitch right here. So I'm gonna take it to my machine. And remember, you don't have to back stitch. Edge. And like I said, let's make a nice stack here. Well, that was nasty. We got a lot of fabric donated and haven't really washed it yet, so some of it's kind of stained. But these quilts you can always wash after. Okay. Another piece. If you're working with like brand new cotton that you just bought from the store, I do recommend washing it before you put it all together because it will shrink. This donated fabric is very old, and I believe it has already been washed once in its life. But I'm also just flying by the seat of my pants right now, so maybe it hasn't. Who knows? We'll find out later. very active over
Somebody's
there.
having fun.
I'm having fun. Maybe I'm just not as loud as they are. Now we have all these chain stitched together. Back to the iron board. It's very important to iron your things together.
Much too terrorist dismay.
That's what your mom's for, Marissa.
She's the pro ironer, I swear.
Yes. Whenever we would go help, I would just give her all my ironing.
Yes.
I'd be like, here.
She loves it too, yeah.
We're working on getting her back out into the world.
But like Marissa was saying, with legacy gowns, you don't have to know how to sew. Like you can sit down and tear apart gowns, which is super cathartic, by the way. Or you can help by gluing buttons on, or bows, or making little hats, which all that involves is cutting some fabric and tying a little thing around. So, or you can iron. Like it makes things go a lot faster.
Yes, it
when there's
does. It
someone
helps.
sitting there. Yeah.
And pre-cutting.
And pre-cutting. Yeah.
Pre-cutting helps the sewers whiz through it.
So don't be afraid to volunteer just because you don't know how to sew. And you never know. Someone might teach you while you're there. Speaking of which, we're breaking open your machine after this.
Okay.
You're going to learn how to sew.
Yeah.
I understand the concept. Getting it straight is a different story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, right?
It doesn't have
It's
to be
made with
perfect.
love, and that's what
Exactly.
matters.
Okay. So now we've got all of our building blocks, more or less. So I'm going to clear off my cutting table here. To be continued. So now what I want to do, since we're making a square quilt, I want to square my blocks. So right now, they aren't quite square. They're about, let's see, 7 3/4 by 8 1/2, right? Because I cut them by 8 1/2. So some people might think this is a waste of time, but I like having them exact. So I take my nice big square ruler and put it in the right spot, not the wrong spot. I like this ruler because it tells me where the square is. And then I'm just going to cut off all the excess. And it doesn't matter if you cut it off on the yellow or you cut it off on the blue, or if you make them both even, that's totally up to you. With the pattern that we're doing today, it doesn't really, you won't be able to see the tiny, tiny bit of yellow missing. So I'll take all of them. And some of them don't even need to be chopped off at the top. It just depends on how straight I made my lines. Sometimes not so straight. And that is okay.
Yep.
They do not have to be perfect. This pattern is very forgiving.
And if you don't sew, you can crochet them, but it needs to be a tight crochet with no little holes in it.
I want to get their fingers or toes caught.
Yeah. So you can crochet them if you're not into sewing.
They can knit as well.
Oh,
as
yeah,
long as
knit.
it's tight.
Oh, yeah. Anything with yarn.
Yeah.
The yarn things. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my pattern. And you can make whatever pattern you want. I prefer to kind of set them askew like this as opposed to like this, Because then, if I put them like this, then you can see if I'm off a little bit. Like say I cut this yellow a little short, then they might be, it's a lot easier to see that mistake, right? But if I turn it like this, no one is the wiser. So this is how I'm going to choose to put them together. Like I said, you can put it together however you want. You can have the blue on the inside, or you could have them in like a symmetrical pattern like this, so it's the same top and bottom. It's totally up to you. I just kind of like the star, so I'm going to do it like this. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our blocks together. So choose any one you want. I'm going to start top right, and remember right sides together. So I'm going to put these two together and flip them like this, right sides together. And then I'm going to stitch along this line right here. So I'm going to take that over to my machine. And then I'm just lining up these edges as best I can. As you can see, they're not perfect, and that's totally fine. Okay, and then we'll sew that at 1/4 inch. And make sure that when you're stitching over these seam lines here, that these stay open. If they're on the bottom under here, sometimes it's easy to miss and they might get like caught up. So make sure that whenever you're going over them, that they are flat. Okay. So there's one. I'll iron that in a second. We're gonna do this side. You thought I was gonna skip it.
You better iron.
There, match these guys up. Okay, so like this time, you see the seam is on the underside. So when I go over those, I'm gonna have to make sure that my feed dogs don't tuck it underneath.
Or you could turn it over.
You could turn it over. Yeah, you could turn it over. Oh, I don't know. I like having it all in my brain one way. I get lost north and south all the time, so having, navigationally, it makes more sense to me this way. Okay, so we've got our two halves, and before we put them together like this, we're going to iron them. So sometimes people will want to push them all to one side because they've got the seam here. I personally just like to iron all of my seams open. So that includes these guys. Thank you. I didn't bring my boom box today. What's wrong with me? Okay. I just like this space over here because it's open. Okay, so we're going to set it back down just to make sure that we've got it in the right spot. I don't want to accidentally sew it like that. That would look really weird. So, setting it back down. Now remember, right sides together. And then we're going to stitch along this line here. Now this is the only seam that you're going to want to make sure that you have lined up on this quilt pattern. That's going to be this center seam right here. So I want to make sure that these two seams are right on top of each other. And then you can pin those just to make sure that when you bring it over to the machine, it doesn't move. So, just like that. So see, like this guy, he got tucked underneath. So I just want to make sure that he's flat. Okay, now our last irons. My brain just short-circuited for a second. Okay. And you can use steam if you want. I don't usually, I don't know, I don't like it being all wet, but if that's how you want to iron, that's fine. It's, as long as you're using cottons, you'll be fine. Okay, so, now we have this guy. And you might have some little tails, remember, because we didn't cut them when we were stitching, so you might have tails on the edge, and you might have tails that peek through here. If that happens, you can just snip them from the top. No one will know. Okay. Next, you're going to take whatever your backing is. So for this guy, I'm using a flannel, and it's like a nice dull color that I think matches that pretty well. So we're going to use this and try to find a spot that's not sun spotted. There we go. This should work. Okay. I'm going to iron this, but this is like motto of the day. I'm going to iron this. Okay. So what we want to do is we're going to lay our backing down, and then we're going to take our top, and we're going to set it on top of our backing. And you want to leave like a good inch or two on every side around it. So you see how I placed it with a little bit of space here, a little bit of space here. And then I'll take my scissors or my rotary cutter, and I'll just cut a rough edge around him so that it looks like this. So before we do the next step, this guy's way too wrinkly. I'm not obsessive about it. It'll look better, I promise. I don't think we can do that through the door, right?
I hope not. That again.
Yeah. Okay. So, for these quilts that we're making, we're not using any batting. Normally, if you're making a quilt with batting, this is where you would include that. So, I'm going to act as if we had batting for a moment so that you can make a larger quilt with batting and still know what you're doing.
Okay, show us what that is.
So this guy is just a temporary adhesive. You can use a permanent one if you want, but I make mistakes and I like to undo them, so I like a temporary. So this is the adhesive that I use to combine, to like seal my back to my batting to my front. This is what I find easiest, but everybody's got their own thing, so do whatever you want. So if I had a batting, this is where I would attach it to the back. I would have my batting down first, and then I would put my back on top of the batting, so that your back piece is on top and your batting is underneath. This is important to know because what's going to happen is I'm going to pull back my back, I'm going to spray my batting, and then I'm going to start from the middle and flatten it out onto the batting. Depending on what kind of batting you're using, your batting is going to stretch. So if my batting were on top and I was trying to flatten my batting, it's going to cause bubbles in your backing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I would fold my back up this way, spray my batting, and then probably like turn around or do something so I can do this easier, but so then flatten it from the center and push it back out to the outside.
Okay.
So if you had batting, that's what you'd do. And then you would take the whole thing and flip it over, right? So your batting's in the middle again. Okay.
You guys use this?
Yeah. So now that we've got our backing and our batting, we're going to put our top on. Also, for when you're cutting your batting, cut it just like you did for your backing, because you're going to want that extra wiggle room space on the edge. Okay, so I'm going to try to flatten it as much as I can right off the bat. And then what I'm going to do, just like we did with the back, we'll pull it back halfway, or however big your quilt is. Sometimes you have to do this in chunks, but I always recommend starting from the center, because then that way you can push all the bubbles out to the outside. Okay. Depending on what kind of adhesive you're using, spray however far away it says. Okay, then I'm going to push from the inside, from the middle. And push it up, out. Okay. So now I've got one half of this is adhered. So you can see how much flatter this is compared to this guy right here. Even though I'm like trying to push him down and make him as flat as possible, this is much more secure here. And it's not going to move when I go to the machine to put the binding on. Okay, then I'm gonna turn this because it's small enough. Do the other half. And you see how I'm not like putting a glob of adhesive on there? I'm just going over it pretty quickly, just to kind of make a big space of light adhesive. Starting from the center.
How long does it stay sticky? Like,
It depends on the brand, but for me, it usually stays sticky long enough for me to put it back into the machine and get the binding on there. I don't know. That's a great question.
I was just curious, like, if I had a bigger quilt, like, how small of areas I should do at once. You know,
It's really however much you can push out at one time. So like if you're working on a queen size quilt and you're gonna lay it all on your floor because it's giant. You're gonna start from the middle, you know, and you're gonna have to probably do like a 12-inch section or row before you're able to move to the next 12-inch section or row. Because me personally, I can only move out so much before it's no longer tacky.
Okay.
So the adhesive does lose its like tackiness or its adhesiveness. And again, that depends on like what brand you're using. This guy only lasts like, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds before I'm able to reuse it. Like right now it's still kind of tacky.
Okay. So I don't want to do this ahead of time?
What do you mean ahead of time?
Like if I did this now and came back tomorrow.
It might lose its tackiness.
Okay.
Yeah. If you did this now and came back tomorrow, what I would suggest is putting some pins just randomly throughout here, like pins along the edge or some pins in the center, just to keep it all in one place.
But it's better to do it right away.
Yeah, but it's better to do it right away.
Okay.
If you wanted to do it the next day, I would recommend like a permanent adhesive, and then you will run into that problem.
Okay.
Because a permanent one is going to stay there. It's used for like applique and stuff. So, okay, this is where we're at. There's a few different ways to put your binding on. I like to square my quilt before I put my binding on. Some people like to put their binding on while there's still this extra batting and backing. So it's totally up to you. Also dependent on how big your quilt is. If you're working with a king size quilt, I'm not sure I would recommend squaring it off because it might shift as you get to the edge. But with something this small, you can definitely square it off before I put the binding So I'm just gonna take a long straight edge, and I'm gonna try to find. I'm gonna try to find the straightest edge that I can here, right on the edge of my top. So you see how it's got it set up there, and then I'm just gonna chop off my backing and my batting, and I don't need that guy anymore. And since these are stuck together, since they're stuck together, I don't have to worry about these coming apart too much. But if you have like a really thick batting and a really thick batting, after you cut this, I would recommend putting pins in on the edge here so that you don't lose, or so that it doesn't get bubbly or bunched up. I'm just gonna go all the way around. Gosh, my phone is so loud. Is that yours or is that mine?
No, I think that's yours. Now, why didn't you turn it inside out? Like a pillow.
Yeah. So
why are you doing it this way versus?
it's personal preference. So something like this. So this quilt right here, it doesn't have a binding on the edge like I'm going to show you with this one. Since this quilt is so small, you can easily just put right sides together. Sorry, hands down here. You can put the right sides together and then stitch it around like you would a pillow casing, leaving a hole and then turn it inside out, side out.
And then top stitch.
And then top stitch it. This is a little bit of a janky top stitch, but you get the idea. So yeah, and then you can just do it that way, and that saves a lot of time, especially if you're like trying to knock these out. But if you're doing a quilt that's like any bigger than this, really, you're gonna want to do a binding. So that's what I'm gonna teach you today, so you can use it for any size quilt. So. Our little quilt here is ready for its binding. Luckily today I already have some strips cut out from the numerous masks we've made.
Oh,
so
thank you, ninjas.
Yes. So I have a plethora of strips to choose from. These are all 2 inches wide. You can use whichever width you'd like. It all depends on how thick you want the line to be on your binding. So 2 inches is fine with me, so I'm going to use 2 inches, and then we're going to pick a color that looks good.
Yeah.
Oh, look, a yellow.
Yeah, that works.
So I'm not sure how many of these we'll need, so I'll grab 4, 2.
How did we end up with so many strips, guys?
You know, it comes in handy.
It does. It does.
We can also make something like a strip like square quilts, like one with square blocks, pretty easily with these strips later. So
I tried that, and I need you to show me an easier way because it was a mess.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got our quilt with our backing, and you can tell that these are stuck together with a temporary adhesive, so we don't have to worry about it too much coming apart. But again, if you're working with a bigger quilt, like a throw or a twin, queen, king, whatever, I definitely would recommend putting pins on the edge so it doesn't come apart. Because you're going to be like folding it and moving it around, trying to get it under your machine, and it's going to get bubbles in it. Okay, so first things first, I don't think this one strip is going to go around that whole square, so I need to make it longer. So what I'll do is to combine binding strips. I hope you can see here. We'll take one end and then put the other end at a 90-degree angle from it, and then we're going to stitch a diagonal line from this corner to that corner so that when it opens up, it'll have a seam like that. So,
and you want one continuous.
yes, you'll want one continuous strip to go around your quilt. The binding, I think, is one of the trickiest parts as far as getting it nice and clean and sharp corners. So I'll go through each step pretty slow. So putting the binding strips together. Like I said, you're just going to go from that corner to this corner. You can take a ruler or something and draw a straight line if you'd like to follow along with. And as you can see, I set my needle back to the center so that I know where I'm going. And this one, I would backstitch on. Just a little bit. And you can see I'm not going all the way to the edge of that fabric, because otherwise it's most likely going to suck it down into my bobbin, and I don't want to deal with that. Well, it wasn't the straightest line, but it'll be fine. Okay, so now I've got this. And what I'm going to do, oh, those are not the scissors I want. We're going to go over to the iron.
Oh, the iron.
Why do you hate the iron so much? You're going to come to love it, I promise. My other scissors are over here. So we've got our diagonal that we stitched. We're going to cut maybe like a 1/4 inch away from that stitching line, because we don't need that. We just want this. Now we're going to open it flat, and we're going to iron this seam open.
Now you sew it that way on a diagonal because it joins better than if you were to sew just the ends together. It's a little bit more seamless. Like,
Kind of.
it looks better.
The reason that we sew it on a diagonal is because this binding is going to get folded about 4 times. And if we had a straight line going across this, that would be like 12 layers of fabric right on top of each other. If we have it on this diagonal, it spreads out the bulk of that seam across this whole area, so we're not having to fight through so many layers at once.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
That makes sense. I like to know the whys of we do things.
Oh yeah, me too. Me too. So, I don't know if this is going to be long enough. We're going to find out, because you can always add to the end as you go. So, we're going to make sure that we find our right side, wrong side, our right sides together, right? So, we want this side against the quilt. So, I'm going to start in the middle of one of the long sections. I'm not going to start on a corner, because we're going to make a corner a certain way that we need extra fabric for. So I'm going to start in the middle of a long section, and I'm going to leave a good tail, okay? So this guy is maybe 6 inches of tail. I'm going to leave that guy hanging out. I'm going to start stitching right here. Okay, so right now I'm working with about a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Again, I love to use the edge of my foot as my marker. You can use whatever you want. With a 2-inch strip, I would recommend 3/8 inch seam allowance or a 1/2 inch seam allowance to reduce bulk and make sure you don't. Yeah. You can do the math later, but I don't know. My brain just tells me this is what it needs to be. So, okay. So I'm going to start right here. And remember, I've got my 6 inches of tail back here. This guy. And I started right in the middle of one of the sides. I'm going to stitch a little bit and then I'll back stitch. We definitely want that locked. And you see I've just got right sides together. We're going to go all the way to the corner. Okay. So, in order to make a nice mitered corner here, instead of going all the way to the edge here, we're actually going to stop however much our seam allowance is from the edge. So since my seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, we're going to stop 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. So I like to measure and then pin. There's adhesive in there, so it's a little tricky. And then pin where my 3/8 mark is, so that I know to stop when I hit that pin. Or right before the pin, don't forget. So I'm going to go to the pin, right there. Then I'm going to back stitch. And then I'm going to actually release. Okay, and I'm going to cut my thread. So we're about 3/8 of an inch away from the corner edge here. And this is where things get a little tricky. try to make as much space so you can see. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this fabric here and we're actually going to turn it at a 90-degree angle so that it makes a little triangle like that. You see how that goes? And we're going to kind of hold that down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fold it again back this direction so that it is flush with the edge there.
And do you iron it?
No. This one I'm just going to press with my fingers and I'm going to pin it there. But I'm going to show you one more time, okay? So got it straight. We stopped 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees.
And you're lining it up with the bottom.
So I'm lining it up so that it is parallel to this edge here that we're trying to go. We're trying to go this direction, right? So I'm going to match it up parallel to that. It should make a beautiful 45-degree angle right here. And if I were to stretch this all the way out, we'd have a nice 90-degree angle here for those mathematicians out there. And then what I'm going to do is I kind of like press this with my fingers so it's nice and flat, and then I'm going to fold this back the direction we want to go. So I want to go this direction, right? So I folded it back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pin through that adhesive and hold that in place because I don't want that little fold to come undone. So now we're going to start stitching with our 3/8 seam allowance from all the way from the edge here and go down. Okay, so I've got my pin. Now we're going back the direction we want to go. I'm going to start at the very edge. Well, you can see that my needle, again, isn't at the very edge of the fabric because I don't want it to get sucked down in there. So I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to back stitch to the edge, and then I'm going to go forward again.
All right, so here's the second part of the video.
This will be
Continue on. Okay, so she just put the binding on the edges.
Yep, so this is where we started. Remember, we left about a 6-inch tail. We stitched down, did our folding of the corners, which you'll see in the other video. So I continued that for all the corners. This guy looks weird because that's where we attached the two binding strips together. So that's why that seam is there. I continued off to this corner. And now we're at the end here. So I stopped stitching and left about, I don't know, 5-6 inches of space here because what's going to happen next is kind of tricky and I'm going to want some space to work in. So we've got our end tail and our beginning tail here. I'm going to try to lay them as flat as I can to kind of control them because this is a lot of stuff. In the middle of our space here, what's going to happen is I'm going to take my end tail and I'm going to turn it 90 degrees to the side, very similar to how we did the corners. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my beginning tail and just lay it over like this. So where these are intersecting right here, you can kind of see through this fabric because it's light. That's where our stitching line is going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick these up with my hand and holding them tightly together. See how they cross at this intersection right here? I'm going to then, and I'll do this again, but I'm going to then pin them together so they're not moving around, and our stitching line is going to go diagonally across just like this. Okay, I'm going to do one more time. So we've got our end tail and our beginning tail. We're going to take our end tail and turn it 90 degrees to the right, about halfway through our little space here. And then we're going to take our beginning tail and lay it flat across. Now this line right here, this diagonal line, that's where our stitching line is going to be. I'm going to pick up the tails, making sure that they stay together. You see how the whole quilt is lifting up? You see how there's like a gapping right here? That's okay as long as these are together and they're staying in place. I'm going to take a pin and pin these two together.
So basically we're joining it like we joined the strips together earlier.
It's exactly what we're doing. The only thing that's tricky about this now is that we want to make it the exact length so that it lays down nice and flat like that, you see?
Okay.
Otherwise we're going to run into some bulky issues. So now's the tricky part. We're going to take this guy that we've pinned. This guy we've pinned, and we're going to kind of pull that quilt out of the way as best we can, so that we've just got this crossing of the two tails. And then remember, we're going to stitch diagonally across this way. I put my pin like this so I would remember to go over it. You can draw a line if it's easier for you to remember that way. Or you can use chalk, however you want. Okay. Now, just like how we joined the bindings before, I'm gonna, back stitch at the front and at the back. Do it all the way. And my thread cutter does work, it turns out.
Oh.
Or not. Okay, so now we've got our tails sewn together on our diagonal. My diagonal is not perfect, but that's okay. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our scissors, and just like we did before, we're gonna cut about 1/4 inch away from that seam. And we're gonna go over to the iron. Okay. So I'm gonna cut my tails square here and square here. And then now we're just left with what it looked like before, right? When we attached the two like that. And I'm gonna cut 1/4 inch off, make sure my iron is on. And then we're gonna iron this guy open. Open, open, open. Not quite hot yet, but it's good enough for now. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to the machine and finish our 3/8 inch seam allowance on the edge here. If it ever gets bunchy like that, you can either use a walking foot, or you can just lift up your presser foot and flatten it back out. All right, so now we have it stitched all the way on the outside. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to press our binding out away from our quilt. There are many different ways to put a binding together. This is just the way that I was taught and the way that I choose to do it on my quilts. If there's a different way that you want to do it, that you've known, by all means, do it. If it's easier for you, awesome. You can look up some YouTube videos. There's like lots of different ways. So just find the easiest way for you and stick with it. Okay. So I'm going to start on the top side of this quilt, and I'm going to push, like iron the binding away from the quilt itself. I'm going to go all the way around. And it gets kind of tricky because it's these corners, you see, they get a little bunched up. So you can kind of flip the fabric up like this and stick the point of your iron in there. I'm just going to go all the way around. And if these little tails of strings bother you, you can cut them. Okay, so now that I've got the top, don't mind that. Now that I've got the top ironed nice and flat, I'm gonna flip it over, and we've got our back. Okay, you can turn your little corners back around. And I'm actually going to go grab my pins real quick. So what our goal right now is to fold this guy over just a little bit. It's about 3/8 of an inch. You can guesstimate. And then we're gonna fold it again over the back like that. So you can see this stitching line that we put the binding on with. We wanna make sure that when we fold this over that it covers that stitching line. Because what's gonna happen is we're gonna go back over to the front and we're going to put a line of stitches in the ditch, stitch in the ditch there, and it's gonna catch that folded back that we have. You can also choose to not stitch in the ditch, and you can just hand stitch it from the back too if you want to do that. I don't like hand stitching, maybe because I'm lazy, but I often just stitch in the ditch instead. The corners are kind of tricky.
Yeah, I was wondering about the corners.
Yeah, I'll show you. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to fold down this first layer, and then I'm going to do that all the way around. When I get to the corners, I'm not going to fuss with them right now. I'm just going to do the straight edges. And again, you might have a way that works better for you. This is just how I do it. Okay, so now that I've got all the way around on the straight edges, ironed and folded over, now I'm going to fold this guy over, making sure that it covers that stitching line, and making sure that it's nice and tight and flush with the edge of our fabric. It'll give it a nice, clean, finished look. Ugh, these pins are not sharp. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it and pin it. You can pin it or not pin it. You can just iron it if you choose. I don't trust my ironing skills, so I like to pin it just to make sure that that edge gets caught. If you have glass heads on your pins, you may iron over them. Do not iron over plastic-headed pins.
Sounds like you know that from experience.
No.
No?
Actually, I haven't experienced that. Okay, now we're at the dreaded corner, right? So what's gonna happen is you're gonna kind of fold under a little bit there. It's really hard to see.
You're just tucking the raw edge.
Yeah, so I tucked the raw edge underneath as if I had folded it like here. And then I'm going to kind of push it out from the inside and fold it down like this. Okay. So we're gonna do one side like that, and then I'm gonna iron that. And this gives it a nice mitered corner look. So you've got one edge nice and folded, and then I'm gonna take this edge and just fold it straight down. And now you see we've got that nice tight corner right there. Again, this gets kind of tricky when you put batting in it because it gets thicker and more difficult to work with.
It's a good thing we're starting off easier.
You always gotta start somewhere. So here we go again. I'm gonna fold all that raw edge underneath, and then I'm gonna fold the right side down like that. If you find that you have like a bunch of fabric bunched up in there, you can take like a chopstick or a turning dowel rod and kind of stick it in there to make it nice and flat. Don't use any sharp objects because you'll poke through your fabric and you might damage it. Like a seam ripper. Try not to use a seam ripper to do that. I've done it before. I'm just folding that guy down. This corner was a little bit trickier because we had that extra bulk from that seam, but just iron it down, it'll be fine. Okay, so I pinned the entire back. I've got it all ironed down. If you flip it over, This is what it's gonna look like. Yes. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to our machine and we're gonna stitch in the ditch. Now this is pretty tricky. There's a special foot for it. If you want to get a fancy stitch in the ditch foot, makes it a little bit easier. It has like I actually brought one with me so I can show you what it looks like, but I'm not going to use it today. All right, let's go to the machine.
I've never stitched in the ditch before.
This is either my stitch in the ditch foot or my blind hem foot. I think you can use either, really. So this foot's gonna have like a little metal tine in the middle, and that's gonna sit in that ditch, and it's gonna make it so that your needle goes directly into that ditch.
Oh.
It will prevent it from like moving left or right or shifting on you. So you can also use it for blind hems.
Yeah, that's another class.
Yeah. I'm not even good at blind hems. I don't do them. I do it by hand. Okay. So you can start wherever you want. I usually start in a straight section so I don't get lost. But my foot here has its own like little guide for the middle. Depending on what kind of machine you're using, like a brother usually starts on the far left side. So your foot should have a little guide on the left side for your brother foot. Yeah. So my Bernina likes to start in the middle. So I'm gonna start in the middle with my little guide on my foot there. I'm gonna try to match it in that ditch as best I can. It's gonna go over sometimes. That's just name of the game. Another thing you could do is you could use like a decorative stitch instead, like flowers or something, and you could just go over the entire ditch with that and not have to do a straight line. So that hides mistakes really easily. That's another way to go about it.
Could you even do like a zigzag?
Yeah, you could do a zigzag. It's all about what you want it to look like. Yeah, so if you want to do a zigzag, that's totally fine. Okay, I'm gonna do a straight stitch because I'll try to hide it as best I can. I would typically use a color thread that matches my binding or matches my quilt so that it's more hidden. Today I only brought black and white, so we're gonna use white, but yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna start. You can backstitch or not, it doesn't matter because you're gonna come back over it anyway. But as you can see, I'm gonna try to follow in that ditch as best I can, taking out pins as I go. My tomato is somewhere else. This is why I have 2 tomatoes at home. I've got one on one side of my studio and one on the other. Thank you so much. Okay. We're gonna go all the way around. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I can already see like spots where I'm going over or under, and it takes some getting used to. All right, when you come to the corner, you're gonna make sure that your needle is down and that your needle is all the way to the edge of that binding spot. There you go, yeah. And then once it's as close as you can get it, you'll turn your quilt. Ugh, my pin got stuck. There you go, you'll turn your quilt. Put your first fret back down, take your pin out, and continue. Depending on how thick your quilt is, if you have like a lot of binding or a minky back with like fluffs on it, you're gonna wanna use a walking foot because that'll prevent any extra bubbles from forming or bunching or bulking. What a walking foot does is it pretty much has like a feed dog on the top as well as your regular feed dog that's in the bottom of your machine. So instead of this foot that stays stationary with a feed dog, a walking foot is going to grab it like this and prevent any bubbles from forming.
I like that visual.
Yeah, I use it at work all the time. throwing things today. Oh gosh, you don't have to pick up after me. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you. Yep. I went over a little bit, but it's okay. No one will know but you. I promise you that. Almost there. All right. We've reached the end.
Yay!
So I'm just gonna cut off my little tails on the front and the back. Oh my goodness. Okay, and so you can see that I've got these little, this is the stitch in the ditch right there. I tried not to catch the top of that binding as best I can and get it to hide right in that ditch. But you know, sometimes I miss, which is totally fine. Then you're gonna wanna flip your quilt over and make sure, check all the way around that it caught your binding. So checking, checking, checking. Sometimes you're gonna miss spots, it happens to me. If that happens, you can go back with a hand needle or hand stitching and just do like a quick little slip stitch or a loop stitch to adhere it to the back, trying not to make it show in the front. Some people like to tack down these corners here. Some people like to tack down the corners here because they do have a little bit of space. You can just, again, use a little hand stitching and tack that down. Totally up to you. I leave them open. That's just how I do it. But again, hang on, I got a tail. That's it. That's it.
Yay!
Well done.
Now it's ready for legacy gown.
Yes.
All right, so we had some quilt tops donated. So I want to show you. This is
beautiful.
a hexagon. They did all different kinds, but they did different squares too that we need to still put together. So I mean, you can get fancy with quilting. So what we're gonna do, let me see if it